I am so thrilled to be here on the second day of Future Food at South by Southwest. A warm welcome to everybody who's physically here in person. And sure, let's clap for it. Thank you for being here in person. South by Southwest is back, 2022. And also a warm welcome to those of you that are tuning in through our We Don't Have Time platform from all over the world. You might not be here in person, but we can hear you. So please use the platform and engage with us. We're going to have an incredible discussion today. We have excellent panelists, and we're going to be talking about something that's not maybe at the top of mind always, but is of critical importance as we think about our collective global future. We're talking about fueling future food systems, how we think about not just people, but energy, and how we do this with intention, so everyone is nutritiously fed and equitably fed. We know that food and agriculture makes up approximately 35% of carbon emissions. We have to bring that down. The world is only gonna continue to warm up and add more people to the planet. So solutions today are going to be what's most helpful for us going into the future. And how do we think about transforming the energy that's required to ensure that we are really, truly, equitably feeding every living soul on this planet? Well, we're gonna take a multifaceted approach to this with an incredible group of experts across energy, food, innovation, and investment. So, before I get to my panelists, I will introduce myself. I am your moderator, Dr. Sweta Chakraborty. I'm the president of We Don't Have Time US. I'm also an independent director at Lightbridge Corporation. The president and CEO of Lightbridge Corporation is to my right. This is Seth Grae. Seth leads Lightbridge's efforts to develop and deploy zero-carbon advanced nuclear reactor fuel that will result in more electricity being provided from existing and new reactors, as well as enhanced safety and proliferation resistance. Thank you for being here, Seth.
Thank you.
Next, we have Brigette Wolf. Brigette is the VP Global Head of SnackFutures at Mondelez. Mondelez's International Innovation and Venture Hub is the, sorry, Brigette. Sorry, Brigette. Okay. Brigette is the global head of SnackFutures at Mondelez. Mondelez International's Innovation and Venture Hub, which launched in 2018 as part of the Global Snack Leaders Growth Agenda. She is a disruptor, you'll see that very soon, in the snacking space, and is committed to reorienting the way the world views snacks and snacking by making it more holistic and a more wellness-oriented experience. After Brigette, we have Shayna Harris. Shayna is the co-founder and managing partner of Supply Chain Capital, a venture capital firm investing in food systems change. Supply Chain focuses on early-stage companies and food and agriculture technology, ingredient technology, and consumer-facing brands with a specific lens to health, sustainability, and diversity. Thanks for being here, Shayna. And finally, we have Vijay Sekhara. He is the Director of Partnerships for MassChallenge, a nonprofit organization dedicated to driving innovation and entrepreneurship through collaboration and development, through accelerating startups, industry, innovation, and ecosystems. Thrilled to have you part of the conversation as well. All right, so we're gonna kick this off with the elephant in the room. There are events happening worldwide that we cannot ignore. And if Ukraine has taught us anything about energy, it's that we are too reliant on oil and gas. So Seth, as somebody who is really looking to support the transition to renewable energy, to protect us from these petro-dictators, how do you think about the current state of oil and gas in food and agriculture? And how do we power food and ag to the extent that we can and not have to rely on fossil fuels?
You know, just recently, the United Nations Human Rights Council, for the first time, acknowledged a right to a healthy environment. And the United States is actually opposing that at the UN, but it's a step towards perhaps having a global right to having a healthy environment. And that's one way perhaps to frame these issues, where food and agriculture produce about 35% of all CO2 emissions in the world, no matter how well we do it decarbonizing other sectors. If we don't significantly decarbonize our fuel supply, we will not meet carbon goals. That will lead to not meeting all sorts of environmental and other goals. And we see this, as you were saying, Shayna, in this reliance on fossil fuels, which clearly is producing all of that CO2 from our fuel, from our food supply production, but also relating to Ukraine. Right now, natural gas prices have shot up hundreds of percent in the last few months in Europe. That has resulted in much less fertilizer production and less production of urea and other components of fertilizer. We're going to have less food production in Europe this year. Food prices are going to go up, and they're going to go up a lot later this year. Ukraine is a massive food supplier and exporter, especially in wheat. You can only imagine how food supply is being disrupted in Ukraine as people are busy doing other things. And so combining with what's happening with fertilizer, we're seeing a food crisis starting to brew, especially for people who can't afford the higher prices, including in export markets from Europe. And I'll just end by saying this leads to what Lightbridge is doing in focusing on having zero carbon electricity production, including, for example, you could right now not shut down reactors in Europe that are slated to close this year, add electrolyzers to use electricity instead of natural gas that's up hundreds of percent to make components of fertilizer and act immediately. And this is something that should be done.
Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, we need to think about how we fuel distribution in the future and the different mix of sources that are going to turn that into reality and move us towards a cleaner and brighter and more equitable future for all. And big companies have a big role to play in that. Mondelez is a large multinational. How is Mondelez thinking about this complex, interconnected challenge of feeding 10 billion people by 2050?
Yeah, so for those who may not know, Mondelez International is a leading snack company across cookies, crackers, many of the products we've talked about, chocolates, in about 150 countries with 90,000 employees. So it is one of those opportunities and responsibilities that we have to where we can make a meaningful, specific impact that we do. So we look at our supply chain actually what we call seed to shelf. And I would argue we're even being mindful now of that post-consumption moment, because what do we do with all the packaging and all the residual, and if there's food waste, and we can go talk about that. So Mondelez has a couple platforms that activities and work streams that we do. One is through our impact, we have a Cocoa Life program that is, if you can think of cocoa as one of our core ingredients, about really building the communities around teaching land use, sustainable farming, building up education for the women and children, and an entire holistic approach to how do we have a more sustainable crop and a safer supply chain. Same thing with wheat. We have a Harmony program for Europe that we have a goal to have 100% of our wheat supplied by that. Teaches farmers how to be more sustainable, think biodiversity, all sorts of rotations. And then where I specifically sit is in SnackFutures, where we do two big things. One is actually creating new brands where we see consumers having needs and well-being and that are sustainable. So upcycled foods like cacao that we use for cacao fruit, or in Dirt Kitchen Snacks having veggie forward and rescued veggies there. And then we find those who do it brilliantly outside and we invest and partner with them. So how do we amplify the startup world that is using breakthrough technologies and innovations or products for consumers that we can actually use the Mondelez platform to help scale them and their impact?
That's awesome. So it's not just the big company that you are, it's also supporting every company that's somewhere on the journey to really moving towards a more sustainable food supply system. So that is awesome. From startups all the way to multinationals, everyone has a role to play in this. Mm-hmm. And especially those who move the money. Yeah. So investing in food systems change is the essence of your venture capital support. Yeah. That's awesome. Why are innovations in overhauling supply chains so critical to reducing the carbon footprint in food and agriculture?
Yeah, it is essential. So if you look at, a third of the impact, as Seth said, of greenhouse gas emissions comes from food. Traditionally, this has been from disturbed natural systems from anthropogenic change, but increasingly it is actually due to our supply chain. So production, processing, logistics, waste is a huge one. And so, we have to think about investing in supply chain efficiencies, investing in a low carbon future across the supply chain if we're going to have an impact on our food system. One of the things that we're looking at Supply Chain Capital is what we're calling the regionalization of food systems. And this is something that's actually becoming venture backable now, which is exciting for me as a capital mover. So one example is, with the Build Back Better bill, there are billions of dollars being put into regional meat processing in this country because there are 4 companies that control 85% of our meat system. Meat farmers, ranchers are not getting paid more, and meat prices have been sky high. And one of the things we need to do is really focus on breaking up that oligopoly. And so we invested in a regenerative meat company called 99 Counties that is in the Midwest, and the idea is as that company expands, they will be focused on sourcing from regenerative meat farmers, and we can talk about and debate the solutions, but I do believe that's one of them in a whole host of solutions that we need, and then they'll sell that regionally to consumers. So basically, there's always going to be a need for a globalized food system, but where do we look at where regionalization really actually makes sense, and then kind of lean into both of those solutions?
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for being a critical force behind seeing this systems overhaul. And we cannot forget the not-for-profit sector, which has a role to play, like every other stakeholder in this planet, seeing us into actually what could be better than what we even have now. So I don't know if you can tell I'm quite optimistic over here. But you know what it's going to take in terms of public-private partnerships and how critical that is. Talk to us about the role of these partnerships in innovation.
Yeah, sure. When I used to think of a startup, I think of the Facebook movie with Jesse Eisenberg and the guy from the second Spider-Man, and 2 guys in a dorm room building a social network. But today we have innovators and founders. We're trying to solve really difficult problems, and that's, energy, agriculture, food security, aerospace and defense, climate action, healthcare, and life sciences. And to solve these really difficult problems, we need data, we need funding, we need the science behind it. And that includes and requires cooperation from governments, from corporations, and from universities, because these innovators aren't simply just trying to make a buck anymore. They're trying to solve real challenges. And not just theirs, not just us in the room or those watching, but those of the entire world.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, and we're going to get into MassChallenge. Before I come back to you, Vijay, I want to make sure we've really set the foundation here in terms of why we even care about reliable power. So why is reliable power actually so essential? Obviously, for food systems and beyond, human beings are not going to appreciate flipping a light switch and not having the lights turn on. We need heating and we need cooling, and as the volatility of the planet increases, the heating and cooling needs also increase. And so it's this vicious cycle that we need to actually respect and understand and get behind. So this is something, Seth, I know you think about on a regular basis. Talk to the audience about why reliable power is so essential.
One of the differences between energy and power is that energy might be available half as much as a solar array or a wind turbine or other source could produce, or all of it, or zero, depending on the time of day. When we talk about power as opposed to energy, we mean all of that energy is available all the time. And to power many of these systems we're talking about, we need the electricity available all of the time. And power is essential for everything. It's It's essential to have food supply, it's essential to have health care, it's essential to have transportation, it's essential for everything. You don't want your subway to stop halfway to your destination because it was energy that drops off. So how we get to a zero carbon grid where we maximize the renewables we can use, hydroelectric. We also have to have nuclear power or other zero carbon means that are not ready yet to balance them that can be available. And one of the things we're doing at Lightbridge, for example, on the nuclear fuel we're developing, is to make sure it allows the new coming small modular reactors to go up and down in power quickly and easily to balance as renewables come on and offline, so you don't just have energy, but you have power. And I think it's important that energy innovators coordinate with food production innovators, with all these different innovators across lines here, so that we do optimize the systems on having zero carbon food supply, et cetera.
What you're doing, Seth, is ensuring that we don't have those disruptions in energy going forward. And this is something, Brigette, you think about, right? Because Mondelez is a commodity-based business, and we know there's going to be unpredictability in the coming years, the next 10, 20 years. There's already supply chain challenges. How do you think about this? How do you deal with this and cope with what is coming if we don't really make a consistent energy supply available?
You know, it's interesting listening to Seth. There's almost two sides of it, right? How much energy can we keep providing? And then we also will say, how can we consume a little bit less? And so, you know, personally, I think I want to do a challenge of how much energy can I eliminate in my household for a week. But from a company perspective, this is actually something that we also look at, is how do we reduce our water usage and our electricity usage, and we have stated goals to reduce that. Or can we start using renewable energy sources like wind-powered plants and factories, or trying to be smarter with our trucks and our fleets that are outside? So it's an ongoing challenge. And from a commodity, it continues to be that way of how do we find different suppliers and partners that can help us solve and be smarter about finding that future of farming and agriculture. And there's a whole field outside of how do we have crops that can grow that don't take as much land and water. So it's a lot of areas that we're exploring.
So you're really thinking about this, and you're vetting these partners. And Shayna, you're vetting partners all the time too, right? You're trying to find the right companies to support, to invest in. What is important to you? How do you prioritize what companies are doing, especially so that we can see the least amount of disruption to the supply chain, again, as the volatility of the planet continues to increase?
Yeah, so our name is Supply Change Capital, because we're investing across the supply chain for change. And we look at 3 different outcomes. So our theory of change is really focused on building healthier communities. It's focused on building a sustainable food system with a strong climate orientation, and it's focused on enabling diverse founders. So let's start with the last one because it's critical. So can anyone here guess, last year, 2021, what percentage of venture funding went to women? We have a guess in the audience. Yeah, under 2%. And it actually went down, okay? When you're talking about women of color, it's well under 1%. And so you can't tell me that 30% of the US population, which is the main demographic getting funding, has all the good ideas. Okay, so that's like table stakes for our investment. How do we make sure that we are eliminating bias or surfacing bias in our process so we can consider everyone's ideas? So the 800 companies we evaluated last year, and we have a process for doing so. We have a framework called Foods that we take these the evaluation through. You can apply on our website, which like most VC doesn't allow you to do that. There's it's not as transparent. So you can apply on our website. Of those 800 companies we looked at, we invested in 7. 6 of the 7 are led by women or founders of color. And that's because those were the best ideas we saw, and they were the ones that were the most oriented towards our impact framework as well. Table stakes to our investment is that it's a venture scalable idea. So we see a lot of really great concepts in the food space and the food tech space where we don't actually think venture money is like the most appropriate, because you can apply for small business loan. There are different ways. If you're taking venture money, it's implied you're going to grow at a certain pace. You're looking to be acquired by a Mondelez. You're looking to go public over a certain time period. So the other really critical item for this is this is a venture scalable investment, which I know Vijay can probably talk more about as well.
So please, Vijay, let's talk a little bit more about that. How do we actually think about prioritizing innovations? How do we make sure that diversity and inclusion is part of every single collaboration and really supported at the company level?
Yeah, prioritizing innovation. I don't know if anyone's watched the news recently, but yikes. Conflict in Eastern Europe, you have a flood somewhere else, a drought somewhere else, and a forest fire. We have rising gas prices, temperatures, healthcare costs. These are the challenges we need to prioritize. And to do so and to motivate these innovators and to support them, we need to champion them. We need to provide equitable access. We need to provide a startup ecosystem that is inclusive. And in my short time with MassChallenge so far, I realized that it's not a gap in talent. It's in funding. It's in access. And to our mentors, to our experts, to our philanthropists, to our investors, provide those resources, your networking, your connections, your knowledge, your money. Support these entrepreneurs from all across backgrounds, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to solve these problems and lead that fight for us.
It was interesting last night. We were talking about diversity and who would to come to a community, and you don't always want someone who looks different from that community to help that community. And I think right now what we're also facing is it's not just supporting a diverse startup group, but how do we bring in those diverse experts and mentors to partner with them? So it's, there's a comfort there, there's a trust there, there's an understanding. And so I think also it behooves us as we look at our classes, not just who we invest in and cultivate, but who do we bring into our ecosystems to help support them as well, which is really important.
I love that this conversation just went in this direction. You have no idea. We're going off script. So the behavioral scientist in me really appreciates this conversation, because you really do need to build trust with your audience. That's how you motivate change. It's how you can predict the most likely outcomes, and it's how you can also influence the most likely the outcomes that you want. And in our case, the one thing I know we all have in common is we want the outcomes to be entrenched in the data, to be entrenched in the science, and aligned to the reality of the risks that we face, so we can prioritize the limited resources we have and ensure that they are distributed most equitably, and to really be able to see into reality a future that is cleaner. It's in our grasp. We have the tools to do it. We have the people, we have the expertise, and we have the capital, we have the dissemination of the capital, we have the innovation. Everything is here. So it's a matter of being able to communicate that and getting people to actually act on those communications. And the way you do it is by having more people that represent the end recipients of these communications that look like them, to really create representation. Once you get that representation, now you are opening up an entire solutions toolkit that has been historically disenfranchised. So unlocking the potential of those who have been not part of the decision-making process and seeing their perspectives contribute to the innovation pipeline, that's something that we haven't even gotten to the tip of the iceberg on yet. So it's a really exciting moment where we can see through our fullest potential as a collective and realize some of these solutions. And yeah, that's how you build trust. That's how you build trust, by finding more people that look like then recipients of the support that they're going to be receiving. That's really critical. So thank you for bringing that up and for doing the work that you do. And that's important for energy, because it is those who have been historically disenfranchised that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate and that are suffering from what is happening in Ukraine. It's the lack of being able to have clean energy, to be able to distribute food in a way that is independent from the whims of these petro-dictators. And those who are suffering because of it are those most vulnerable. So how does a transition to clean energy ultimately result in a more equitable, distributed food environment? That's for you, Seth.
Big one.
I don't think we've ever more clearly, as a general population, really seen and understood an alignment between clean energy and national security. as much as we're seeing it now. And as Shayna was saying, relying on countries that certainly don't have our best interest in mind for a large part of our energy or our allies' energy in ways that could be cut off, which means cutting off much of food supply. It's cutting off everything in the modern world. Everything is mass produced. When we say that food and agriculture produce 35% of all CO2 emissions in the world, it's because food and agriculture largely is a very industrialized business. Our agricultural production is in many cases not on what many of us imagine as a farm, but something that looks a lot more like a factory with a smokestack on it. And we can't feed 7.9 billion people on the planet unless it's like that. And we absolutely need to have clean, reliable energy supply that does not rely on, to use Sheta's term, petro-dictators.
Call it
And
what it is.
this is not an easy transition to do any more than the general energy transition is easy to do. We need to transition to clean energy relying on sources from within our own borders and those of our allies. And frankly, nuclear has more than a 1 million to 1 energy density advantage over any other way of producing power. It produces more than 1 million times as much energy from the same amount of material as anything else. And without having that, and quickly, as part of that transition, in a diversified energy base, but including growth in nuclear, without that, we won't meet any of these goals, including our national security goals.
And ultimately, we want those who are most vulnerable to have equal access. And so this is clean energy is going to be the equalizer. So we really need to usher it in as fast as possible. And we need to make sure that people are truly able to get access to all of the foods that we can sustainably provide to them. And these are programs that I know you are working on, and we'd love to hear more about it. Talk to us about how you think about mobilizing the ecosystem to really fuel the future of snacks and different programs that you have underway, like colas.
So I think what's amazing is when you have a large institution like ours, we have a huge ecosystem internally of all the experts and a geographic footprint, but we have all of our suppliers and vendors. And one of the things that we saw with SnackFutures as we were creating our brands that were very different from our core was there's all these new ways of doing it. And then you start having conversations at different tables and you start meeting new people. And so one of the things that we bridge between that invent and invest is a program that we call Collab, which is intentionally named that to be a collaboration. And it's bringing that power of big and small for how Mondelez can help a set of startups. So we had our first class last year, and we bring them through a 12-week program. I call it a startup engagement. Sometimes some folks like accelerator and incubator, but this is really about an engagement and an interaction and a collaboration to give them the mentorship, the tools, the capabilities, and then that access. And that's really where it's access to the ecosystem that we know of and that our partners know of. So it starts becoming a 6 degrees of separation in the ecosystem. If anyone was at Expo West last week, you start seeing that amplification if somebody knows someone and grabs someone and then they introduce them to the new startup. So we are always open to bringing in those suppliers. And I think, to this last point, I will be deliberate in making sure we have a diverse slate of our vendors and partners to mentor them as well. We have our current class that is going to start next week, or April, first week of April, run through June. And again, they are across the board of good for people, good for the planet, and we ask them to do what's their mission and purpose this year. So they're very explicit in how they're helping. And then for us, it's really how do we bring a broader world to them to serve them and help them grow.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We know that the private sector is going to has to play a significant role in overhauling energy and overhauling food systems. And Shayna, you are the muscle behind that overhaul. Yet the landscape is still so saturated with these dinosaurs of companies that are still entrenched in fossil fuels. How do we think about really mobilizing capital and mobilizing the private sector to transition away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy?
Well, we're laughing because we got to work together. So Brigette is from one of the largest food companies in the world. I used to work at one of the largest food companies in the world, at Mars. I have a super deep appreciation for how all the different sectors come together: policy, corporate, nonprofit, innovation, venture capital, that whole landscape. So I think it really is critical. What it needs to happen, though, is at the earliest stage, which is that pre-seed and seed stage, when ideas are getting started, they're sparking, that these entrepreneurs are getting funded, because these are ideas that will eventually funnel in to, I mean, some of those companies will IPO, they'll become the next, General Mills, become the next Mondelez, but others will be integrated in. And Mondelez actually has a super interesting M&A portfolio around this. And so I think, one of the really critical pieces of this is how do we seed entrepreneurs at the earliest stage. At the same time, we cannot just rely on that, because like Chloe said in an earlier panel, we have 8 years, according to the IPCC report, to make big change. So this is where policy and regulation is really critical. We need policy and regulations that are favoring and tipping the economics in favor of sustainable energy solutions and sustainable food solutions. And unfortunately, with the way our food system is rigged, subsidizing commodities that are bad for the earth and bad for our health when we consume them in the quantities we do, we're challenged. So 75% of our diet comes from 12 crops. And there's about 150 crops worldwide that we eat. 50% of our diet comes from 3 crops. So think about that, right? We really need to be supporting diverse ingredients. We really need to be supporting alternative proteins, like we heard on the earlier panel. And policy and the money that government can put into this actually plays a pretty big role in accelerating it. So I think from each of our seats, we play a role. But I actually really think one of the biggest movers and catalysts of this, if we can get it to move in this legislative environment, is really on the legislative front.
We could not agree more. It's why Seth and I are close in location for exactly that reason, Virginia and Washington, D.C. We're working on it. Yeah. So, Vijay, you're sitting next to those who can really support innovation and collaboration. So what are the tools that you still need? What do innovators still need? Here's a chance to make a direct appeal to those on the panel, to other stakeholders. What from your work with MassChallenge, what is still missing that can really be the kind of critical game changer?
I appreciate the easy question. Thank you. We need more venture capital. We need greater acceleration capacity. We need more experts in every field. And to some of the points we've made on this panel earlier, we need to champion those founders, but we also need to identify those folks who have yet to realize their great idea, who have yet to realize that they too can become a founder. To the stakeholders here on the stage and in the room, we may not all be in the same boat, but we're definitely in the same storm. And we do need to weather that together. And for our innovators, I just want to say, I studied chemical engineering in college. Heat transfer, process controls, dynamics of a fluid in a pipe. That's what I was taught in university. But I was never taught what to do when that pipe burst. So I think we need to, go ahead and draw outside those lines. Think outside the box, break the mold, because you're the ones that are going to be solving these problems that we're all discussing here on stage today.
And for those of you who are tuning in, all across the globe through the We Don't Have Time platform, you heard it here directly. We are speaking to you. There is so much opportunity, and it's yours to grab. So please engage with the panel through the app, and look for all of the opportunities that are being made available through collaborations. We're really trying to connect the innovators to the capital to really find that next solution to the climate crisis. And I mean, it's very clear, Shayna, you said it. Vijay, you're saying how important collaboration is. Shayna, you're saying that the biggest thing we can do is really move legislation in the direction that supports that collaboration as well, right? So of course we're all doing our part. Of course there are young people, intergenerational actually, that are truly innovators. But how do we actually think about getting that legislation to be directed in a way that is really going to support this entire, everything we're talking about, this entire conversation? Seth, I know you think about this a lot. This really is a political will challenge, a lot of it, because we have so much of the talent, we have so many of the solutions at our fingertips. But ultimately, the challenges that we need to overcome is that of convincing legislators, policymakers, that this is something that, regardless of the implications for their political careers, there's a bigger picture here. There's implications for the planet. Political careers don't matter if there's not a breathable planet to be working on together. So how do you think about this? How do we overcome that political will and take Shayna's suggestion and make it a reality?
Well, we need government, assisted by the private sector, to start to get out of their silos more, the people in government, and we need to start looking at how our energy supply really relates to protecting our allies, our food supply, meeting climate goals. And these are all interrelated, and we need the people who are fighting for national security goals, fighting for climate goals, to start to coordinate. And we need that driven to some extent by the people they're talking to in government, because if we are dividing these resources, we're not going to meet any of these goals.
Is it fair to say that national security is food security and vice versa?
It absolutely is.
So, same question to you. How do we actually overcome the political divide to see through the innovations that are going to benefit us as a collective humanity? Because first and foremost, we are humans. We all need to eat food, breathe air, drink water, right? How does Mondelez think about this?
So I don't know if I can answer exactly for Mondelez, because I know we try and influence policy, but I will say, as a marketer, as an innovator, and as a human who eats and breathes and has children who would like to have, their children have a planet that's safe and kind and healthy for them, is for all of the political will. And we heard Secretary Pete actually this week as well, and he talks a lot about local, and like so many things, business serves customers. So you tell us what you want, and we will try and find a way to make that, to sell it to you. Same thing with politicians. So I will speak now directly to your community. Find 5 friends, colleagues, family members, and amplify it. Because I think one of the ways that we make the movement is to have more informed consumers and constituents, which we are clearly seeing around the world with misinformation. We don't act collectively, and we don't change the will of our governments. And so I think there's a lot of how do we inform people of what's happening locally and what their reality is. What does that mean for their planet? And then how do we engage more? Clearly, this is an impassioned group, but how do we make that movement that much bigger? Because that's where the groundswell really has to happen. And on every level, consumer, political, everything.
Yes, no, thank you for that. And Shayna, there's so much, trillions that are being managed that can really be impactful as we think about gearing that capital towards solving this very complex interconnected crisis. We're talking about food systems, but of course that is so integral to the big challenge of the planet warming. So what is the role that money managers can play?
Well, there's a lot of talk about ESG, so hopefully we know what that is, environmental social governance. And I started my career off actually in the nonprofit sector at Oxfam as an activist and a campaigner doing work in sustainable food systems. And so there I really saw the power of policy and also kind of outsider activism to influence the government and corporate policy. So I was one of the kids out rallying and organizing. And I think what's really interesting is there, we had to formulate a theory of change to raise money as a nonprofit and have very specific metrics and KPIs we would then report on to our funders, like the Ford Foundation and others. I took that view into Mars as we created a theory of change around cocoa sustainability, and then that kind of bled into the industry and some other places. And it's the same approach we've taken as an investment firm. one of the things that's been interesting to me, not being a traditional, like I don't come from an investment banking background like a lot of VCs do, is that the investment community is really lost when it comes to ESG. There's a lot of jargon, nobody knows how to measure anything, and it's not really linked to what is your thesis or hypothesis or theory of change about the impact you're going to make. And I do think that there are some organizations that have very deeply rooted theories of change that can kind of lead the way. So I think we need to have very specific metrics we're measuring against and be transparently reporting on those year after year in a way that that is relatable to the public, and it's kind of across the board. Because right now it's very much like an alphabet soup of metrics. So how do we make this accountable? And I think it's through be very clear and intentional about what our outcomes are going to be. Measure them, report on what's working and what's not. Like what's even more interesting is what's not working. What is fine. Like we see all these great reports every year, but what's not working? What have we learned? And there you're really going to, I think from an investment dollar perspective, you'll be able to move the money. I talk to a lot of LPs. LPs are the limited partners that invest in funds like mine who say, we have an ESG mandate, we care about it, we want to make this happen, but they don't really know how to measure it, how to get reported on the data, et cetera.
Very, very good points. Thank you for sharing that. We have an ESG talk coming up later today, so please do stick around. And of course, those who are tuning in through the We Don't Have Time platform, do watch and learn about ESG because it's exactly what you said.
And there's some investors that'll be on that panel,
right,
so it'll be a good conversation.
Right. And as somebody who chairs an ESG committee for a publicly traded company, I will be tuning in as well. So thank you. And Vijay, how do we get the people involved? How do we get the innovators, the public, to also be part of the solution in terms of overcoming that political divide? There's power in people. How do we harness and leverage it?
I think we need to do a better job of collecting the data, of telling the story, because we have so many successful startups that are working to solve food insecurity, that are working to solve our agricultural issues. And Seth, to your point earlier, food security is national security. I mean, since the dawn of forever, how many conflicts have we had because a certain group of people didn't have enough food at the table? And, being able to tell the story of our startups in historically underserved and underrepresented backgrounds who've experienced themselves what food insecurity looks like with these problems, who are now working to solve that problem, to be better storytellers, to share with our legislators, with our investors, with our accelerators, that solving these problems is possible if we bring the right people in the room, and we have them communicate, collaborate, and collide together. So the evidence is there. Yeah. There you go.
We just came up with that, or does it already exist? Okay.
I'll give you that one if I can use petrodictator.
Yes.
So thank you.
Take it, run with it. We only have a few minutes left, and what I'd love to do, your final thoughts, please keep it 30 seconds. Can we overcome this massive challenge of transitioning to clean energy so we can equitably, nutritiously feed, 30-second answer to this massive question, so we can equitably and nutritiously feed 10 billion people on the planet by 2050? Seth.
We only have a hope of doing it if we immediately start investing much more massively in the systems that actually can produce clean energy now.
Perfect, thank you.
I too am an optimist, and I would say yes. If you look at the trajectory of change over the last 50 years with technology in almost every field, there is no way that this is impossible. The question is, how do we communicate and collaborate and collide it all together? So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we have 8 years, so like Seth said, it has to start now. So the solutions are out there. I think we've seen so many change makers speaking over this last week at South by Southwest, and even today. And these are all solutions that need to be working in tandem, but we really have to put everything we can behind it now, and we really need government resources and money to do it now.
Awesome.
I instantly thought of the scene from Interstellar, and we're in Austin, so there has to be a Matthew McConaughey reference somewhere. When Anne Hathaway tells him that it's absolutely impossible to dock the ship to the station, and he says, no, it's not impossible, it's necessary. And possible or not, it doesn't matter. We have to get this done.
Love it. You are all mic drops right now. So let's do a collective mic drop from this. Let's do a round of applause for the collective mic drop for this incredible panel. Thank you so much. Thank you to each of you for contributing your expertise and your solutions to overcoming the climate crisis. Together, we are the solution. Thank you.